Hello. Say hello, Maple. We're going to read a book to everybody today. Maple is probably going to nap and fall asleep or give us a big yawn. That was a nice yawn. Are you ready to listen to the Book of Longings like we do every Thursday at 12:30? So here we are again. We'll just give a few minutes to wait and let everybody join. I hope you guys are doing great today. So we'll get started, and I'll set my camera down carefully. Okay. I hope you guys have had a nice week. I cannot believe that it has already been a week since we met. And I'm not sure that this window is going to last. The sun has moved and is shining right in the window. So we'll see how this goes. We might need to find a different location in the house. So today I wanted to talk to you for a moment, as I do as we get started. And just, I always come up with a question to ask everybody before we start. And so today's question is, what is your favorite documentary that you have watched, if you've watched one in the last year? And if not, what is your favorite documentary of all time? So I would love to know. Hi, Marcia. Welcome. So we are asking everybody if they have a favorite documentary. So I tend to read books, mostly that are nonfiction. And one second, Maple. Okay, that's good. Now you go lay down. Go lay down. Okay. So I tend to read books that are nonfiction, and I have a hard time sitting still for movies typically. I love to watch documentaries, and one of the things that I've been working on for myself is making myself watch movies and read books that are not designed to educate me constantly. I'm really focusing on kind of letting myself be entertained. I have a hard time sitting still, and I always kind of feel like I need to learn something and make it matter. And I know I drove my parents crazy when I was in high school because I was always on a quest to learn more and always push myself. But I do love documentaries. So my favorite, probably that I've seen the last couple of months, there's a new one out called Fantastic Fungi, like mushrooms. And not only is it visibly beautiful with incredible music and a really nice narration, but it was entertaining, but it was so educating about the world of mushrooms and fungus. You know, it sounds so strange to be saying that's one of my favorites, but one of the things that I notice when I wake up in the morning here is that a lot of, and I don't know if it's like this where you are, but we have a native hardwood mulch on our flower beds. And so there are all these interesting mushrooms that pop up and arise. And I don't usually know what they are. Although one time there were shiitakes, and it's been really fun. And so the Fantastic Fungi, so good, you guys. I'm not even going to say much more about it. It's just so entertaining and so eye-opening from all perspectives, medically, nutrition, and anyway, it's really good. So I think it's on Apple TV right now, but or maybe on iTunes. I could look and see if there's other sources. Okay. The other favorite it's on Netflix right now, if you have Netflix, and it's called The Social Dilemma. It is so amazing and so eye-opening. If you are on social media, which obviously you are because you're here now, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in history, interested in culture, pop culture, I mean, just all those topics are thread through The Social Dilemma. And I used to work in the tech industry, so I found it really fascinating. But if you're using social media, I highly recommend you watch it. So it was so thought-provoking that the first maybe 45 minutes or so, Sean and I both looked at each other and went, and then we decided to shut it off so that we could discuss it a little bit the next day and then watch the other half. And the other half ends really nicely. And I found it very helpful and informative. Okay, so looks like we have a quorum. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, great. Sue's favorite documentary was the life story of Franklin Eleanor Roosevelt. Oh, I would love to see that. Oh, thanks. Great suggestion, Sue. Thank you so much. Sue's joining us from Minnesota. I believe that Marcia is in Tulsa. And my friend Desiree in Oregon might be joining us as well. So, and then others will be popping in. So we'll get started. I'm a little chatty Kathy. All right. Goodness, we're making our way through this book. We are on page 300. Okay, so the sun is really coming in the window as we move into fall, so I might sit back a little bit. All right. Isis Medica appeared in the royal quarter near the harbor like an island unto itself. Catching my first glimpse of it from a distance, I slowed my steps to take in a complex array of walls, tall pylons, and rooftops. It was more expansive than I'd imagined. Now, do you guys remember that Anna's sister Yaltha was going to find her daughter Chaya? That was where we were. Yalta pointed. See the pediment of that large building over there? That's the main temple to Isis. The smaller ones are minor temples to other divinities. She squinted, trying to make sense of the maze. Over there, that's the healing sanctuary where Chaya attends, and behind it, not visible, is the medical school. People come from as far as Rome and Macedonia to find cures here. Have you ever sought a cure there? I asked. No, I've been inside the walls only once, and then merely out of curiosity. The Jewish citizenry doesn't go there. It's a transgression of the first commandment. Last night I'd learned to love her weakness. Today it was her daring that excited me. Did you go inside Isis's temple? Of course. I remember there was an altar there where people left little statuettes of Isis as offerings. And the healing sanctuary? Did you go there too? She shook her head. To enter, one must present an illness and be prepared to remain through the night. Those seeking cures are put into an opium sleep, in which they dream their cure. It's said that sometimes Isis herself comes in their dreams and presents cures. So strange was all of this, it left me speechless. But inside me, there was a kind of humming. The outer courtyard swarmed with people making music. Sistrums rattled and flutes piped out soft curling sounds that spiraled like ribbons through the air. We watched a line of women wind through the scarlet pillars of the colonnade, their dance like a bright glowing centipede. Yalta, who understood the Egyptian tongue, cocked her head and listened to their song. They're marking the birth of Isis's son Horus, she said. We seem to have come on a day of celebration. She tugged me past the courtyard and dancers, small unnamed temples, and wall reliefs painted with blue flowers, yellow moons, and white ibises, until we arrived at the main temple, a marble structure that looked more Greek than Egyptian. We stepped inside into a foggy cloud of incense. Kaifi billowed out of the censers, the smell of wine-soaked raisins, mint, honey, and cardamom. Around us, a sea of people strained their necks for a glimpse of something at the far end. What have they come to see? I whispered. Shaking her head, Yalta led me to a low niche in the rear wall, and we climbed up to stand inside of it. I swept my eyes over the top of the crowd, and it was not something the throng craned to see, but someone. She stood erect in a robe of yellow and red with a black sash from her left shoulder to her right hip. It was covered in silver stars and red gold moons. On her head, a crown of golden cow horns. I'd never seen anyone so mesmerizing. Who is she? She would be a priestess of Isis, perhaps the highest of them. She wears Isis's crown. The doll-like statuettes Yalta had mentioned were heaped on the floor around the altar like mounds of washed-up shells. The priestess's voice came suddenly like a cymbal clap. I leaned toward Yalta. What is she saying? Yalta translated. O Lady Isis, goddess of all things, you bring the sun from rising to setting and light the moon and the stars. You bring the Nile over the land. You are the Lady of light and flames, the mistress of water. I began to sway with her monotonic chant. When it ended, I said, Aunt, I'm glad you allowed your fears about finding Chaya to thwart you for so long. If we'd come any sooner, we would have missed this great spectacle. She looked at me. Just take care not to fall off the niche and break your skull. An attendant in a white tunic made her way to the altar, holding a bowl of water, taking feather steps as she labored to keep the liquid from spilling over the sides. The priestess took the bowl and poured the libation over a colorfully painted statue of Isis that stood on the altar. The waterfall splashed over the goddess, spilling onto the floor. Lady Isis, bring forth your divine son. Bring forth the rising of the Nile. When the ceremony ended, the priestess left the chamber through a narrow door at the back of the temple, and the multitude moved toward the entrance. Yalta, however, made no effort to climb down from the wall niche. She stared straight ahead with rapt concentration. I called her name. She didn't answer. Gazing in the direction she stared, I saw nothing unusual. Only the altar, the statue, the bowl, the attendant drying the wet floor with a cloth. Yalta stepped down and strode against the crowd as I scurried behind. Aunt, where are you going? She stopped a few paces from the altar. I had no understanding of what was happening. Then I looked at the attendant who was lifting herself from the dried floor, her dark hair like brambles. In a voice so muffled I almost didn't hear it, Yalta said, Diodora? And her daughter turned and looked at her. Diodora laid her cloth on the altar. Do you have some need of me, lady? She asked in Greek. She bore a startling resemblance to me, not only in the kinks and whorls of her hair, but in the black eyes too large for her face, the small pursed mouth, the tall, thin body like a gathering of willow boughs. We looked more like sisters than cousins. Yalta stood transfixed. Her eyes moved over her daughter as if she were not flesh and bone, but air and apparition, a visage she'd half dreamed. I saw her lip quiver ever so slightly, the commotion of a bee's wing. Then she threw back her shoulders, as I'd seen her do 100 times. Seconds passed, ceaseless seconds. Give her an answer, Aunt. I wish to speak with you, Yalta said. May we find a place to sit? Uncertainty wrinkled Diodora's face. I'm only an attendant, she said, and took a step backward. Do you also serve in the healing sanctuary? Yalta asked. That's where I attend most often. Today I was required here. She picked up the cloth and wrung it out in the bowl. Have I attended you there in the past? Do you wish to seek another cure? No, I didn't come for healing. Later I would think Yalta was wrong about that. If you have no need of me then I'm tasked with removing the offers. I must see to it. She hurried away, disappearing through the door at the back. I didn't think she could be so beautiful, Yalta said. Beautiful and grown and very much like you. She's also puzzled, I said. I'm afraid we made her ill at ease. I moved close to my aunt. Are you going to tell her? I'm trying to find a way. The door opened and Diodora emerged carrying 2 large empty baskets. She slackened her pace when she saw we were still there, the 2 peculiar strangers. Without acknowledging us, she knelt and began placing the Isis figures into a basket. I lowered myself beside her and picked up one of the crudely fashioned carvings. Up close, I saw it was Isis cradling her newborn son. Diodora cast a sideways glance at me but said nothing. I helped her fill both baskets. In my soul, I was a Jew, but I closed my fingers around the statuette. Sophia, I whispered to myself, calling the figure by the name I loved. When all the offerings had been gathered, Diodora rose and looked at Yalta. If you wish to speak with me, you may do so on the portico of the birth house. The birth house was a shrine to honor the motherhood of Isis. The small column building sat near the courtyard, which was still and quiet now, the dancing women gone. Diodora led us to a cluster of benches on the portico and sat facing us, her hands clasped tightly and her eyes shifting from Yalta to me. She must have known that something momentous was about to occur. It seemed perched in the air over our heads like a bird about to swoop, 100 birds. My heart is full, Yalta told her, so full it's difficult for me to speak. Diodora tipped her head to the side. How is it that you know my name? Yalta smiled. I once knew you by another name. Chaya. It means life. I'm sorry, lady, I do not know you or the name Chaya. Oh, it's a long, difficult story. All I ask is that you allow me to tell it to you. We sat at a moment with the rustling in the air, and then Yalta said, I've come over a great distance to tell you that I'm your mother. Diodora touched her hand to the gully between her breasts, just that small gesture, and I felt an unbearable tenderness come over me. For Diodora and Yalta and the years stolen from them, but also for myself and Susanna, my lost daughter. And this is Anna, your cousin, Yalta said. My throat thickened. I smiled at her, then mirrored her gesture, placing my hand to my breast. She sat terrifyingly still, her face as unreadable as the alphabet ash we'd created in the oven. I could not imagine myself hearing such a thing as she'd just heard. If she lashed out in mistrust or grief or anger, I wouldn't have blamed her. I almost preferred such reactions to this strange, inscrutable quiet. Yalta continued in measured sentences, sparing Diodora nothing, as she relayed the details of Rubel's death, the murder accusations against her, and her 8-year exile with the Therapeutae. She said, the Jewish council decreed that if I left the Therapeutae's precincts for any reason, I would be given 100 strokes by Cain, mutilated, and exiled to Nubia. This I'd never heard. Where was Nubia? Mutilated how? I slid closer to her on the bench. When she'd finished the entire story, Diodora said, if what you say is true, and I am your daughter, where then was I? Her voice sounded small, but her face was like an ember. Yalta reached for Diodora's hand, which she quickly drew back. Oh, child, you were little more than 2 years old when I was sent away. Haran swore to keep you well and safe in his household. I wrote letters to him inquiring of you, but they went unanswered. Diodora frowned, rolling her eyes to the top of a column crowned with a woman's head. After a moment, she said, if you were sent to the Therapeutae when I was 2 and remained there 8 years, I would have been 10 when you left them. Why didn't you come for me then? Her fingers moved in her lap as if counting. Where have you been the last 16 years? As Yalta struggled for words, I spoke. She has been in Galilee. She's been with me, but it's not as you think. She didn't regain her freedom when you were 10, but she was banished once again, this time to her brother in Sepphoris. She had hoped to reclaim you and bring you with her, but Haran told me he'd given you out for adoption and he would not reveal your whereabouts, Yalta said. I left then. I felt I had no choice. I thought you were cared for, that you had a family. I had no knowledge that Haran had sent you to the priest until I returned to Egypt over a year ago to search for you. Diodora shook her head almost violently. I was told my father was a man named Choyak from a village somewhere in the south, that he sold me out of destitution. Yalta placed her hand on Diodora's, and once again Diodora yanked it away. It was Haran who sold you. Anna has seen the document of sale in which he disguised himself as a poor camel keeper named Choyak. I didn't forget you, Diodora. I longed for you every day. I returned to find you, though even now my brother threatens to revive the old charges of murder if I should seek you out. I ask your forgiveness for leaving. I ask your forgiveness for not coming sooner. Diodora dropped her head onto her knees and wept, and we could do nothing but let her. Yalta stood and hovered over her. I didn't know whether Diodora was grieved or comforted. I didn't know whether she was lost or found. When she ceased weeping, Yalta asked her, was he kind to you, your master? He was kind. I do not know if he loved me, but he never raised his hand or his voice to me. When he died, I grieved for him. Yalta closed her eyes and blew out a little breath. I had no intention of saying anything, yet I thought of my parents and Susanna, whom I'd lost, and of Jesus, my family in Nazareth, Judas, and Tabitha, who were all so far away, and I felt no assurance that any of them would be restored to me. I said, let us be more than cousins. Let us be sisters. The 3 of us will be a family. Light was falling in bright bands across the colonnade, and she squinted up at me and said nothing. I felt like I'd said a foolish thing, that I'd trespassed somehow. At that moment, someone called her name from a distance, singing it. Diodora, Diodora. She leapt up. I've neglected my duties. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her tunic, then pulled on her tight, stoic mask. I don't know when I can come again, Yalta said. Hiram returns from his travels tomorrow, and as I said, he forbids us to leave his house. We will find a way somehow. I do not think you should return, she said. She walked away, leaving us there on the portico of the birth house. Yalta called out to her, "Daughter, I love you." Number 17. The following day, in the scriptorium in Hiram's house, I listened to Lavi read from the Iliad in starts and stops, finding it difficult to stay focused. My mind wandered to Diodora and to the things spoken in the birth house. I kept seeing her walk away from us. What will we do? I'd asked Yalta during the long walk from Isis Medica back to Hiram's. "We'll wait," she replied. With effort, I turned my attention back to Lavi as he faltered over a word. When I attempted to prompt him, he held up his hand. "It will come to me." It took an entire minute. "Ship," he cried, beaming. He was in a happy, though somewhat nervous mood. Earlier that morning, a courier had arrived with news that he'd been granted the position at the library. His apprenticeship would begin on the first day of the following week. "I've made a vow to finish reading Achilles' adventures before my employment," he said, lowering the codex. "My Greek is not yet perfected." "Oh, don't be concerned, Lavi. You read Greek quite well." "But yes, finish the poem. You must find out who prevails, Achilles or Hector." He seemed to bask in my praise, sitting up taller. "Tomorrow I will go to Pompey's father to ask for a settlement of marriage. Oh, Lavi, I'm glad for you." His nervousness, I realized, was not merely about his reading skill. "When do you hope to wed?" "There's no betrothal period here as there is in Galilee. Once her father and I draw up the settlement and sign it before witnesses, Pamphile and I are considered married. She gave me a portion of her wages, and I purchased a Shopti box as a gift for him. I will not ask for a bride price. I hope these things will be enough to conclude the contract tomorrow." I walked over to Thaddeus' desk and gathered up a stack of papyrus sheets, the costliest and finest in Egypt. "You may offer him these as well. It seems an appropriate gift from a librarian of the great library." He hesitated. "Are you sure? Will they be missed?" "Hiram has more papyrus than exists in all of Sepphoris and Jerusalem combined. He won't miss these few sheets." As I thrust them into his arms, there was a shuffling at the door. The servant who did Hiram's bidding was standing there. "Our master has just returned," he said, his eyes traveling to the papyri. "Does he have need of me?" I asked, more haughtily than I should have. "He asked to inform the household of his return, that is all." Once again, we were in captivity. I'm going to take a quick minute and change my air. It's getting kind of cold. I'll be right back. So we have warm days. We've had cold weather, and then now we're having warm weather, and the vent is right behind the book, and it was blowing up. So it'll keep me awake so I don't fall asleep. It was a little chilly because the air conditioning was blowing because it's so warm outside today. Okay. Waiting was an insufferable endeavor. One sat, one dithered, one stirred a pot of questions. I fretted over whether we should accept Diodora's rejection or find a way to return to Isis Medica. I pressed Yalta to set a course, but she persisted in her waiting, saying if the pot was tended long enough, the answer would bubble to the surface. A week passed, however, and we seemed no closer to resolving the matter. Then, one day, with the sun dangling low above the rooftops, Pamphile broke in upon Yalta and me in the sitting room, breathless from hurrying. "A visitor has arrived asking for you," she said. I imagined it was the long-awaited courier bearing a letter from Judas. "Come home, Anna. Jesus bids you to come home." And my heart began to thump. "She waits for you both in the atrium," Pamphile added. I knew then who it was. Yalta nodded at me. She knew as well. "Where's Haran?" Yalta asked. "He's been away all afternoon," Pamphile answered. He hasn't yet returned." "Bring the visitor to us here, and say nothing of her presence to anyone but Lavi. My husband hasn't returned either." She let the word husband slide slowly from her tongue. The marriage settlement had been signed as Lavi had hoped. "Be certain to alert him when he arrives. Ask him to wait in the garden out of sight. When our visitor leaves, we will need him to slip her out through the servant quarters." "Who is she?" Pamphile asked, alarm appearing on her face. There's no time to explain, Yalta said, and waved her hand impatiently. Tell Lavi it's Chaya. He'll know. Now, hurry. Yalta opened the door onto the garden, allowing hot air to invade the room. I watched her preparing herself, smoothing her tunic, taking deep, concentrated breaths. I poured 3 cups of wine. Diodora hesitated at the threshold, peering inside before she entered. She wore a rough weave brown mantle about her white tunic and had pinned back her hair with 2 silver ornaments. Her eyes were painted with malachite. I didn't know if I'd see you again, Yalta said. When Diodora stepped inside, I quickly closed the door, which had an iron lock on the inside and on the outside, but we had no key to secure it. I reminded myself that Haran had not come to our rooms in all the time we'd been here, so why would he do so now? Standing in the middle of the room, Diodora looked thin and childlike. Did she know how dangerous this was? Yet there was a beautiful irony in her being here. The girl he'd gone to such lengths to be rid of was in his house, beneath his roof, under his nose. It was a revenge so hidden and so precise, I wanted to laugh. I offered her the cup of wine, but she refused it. I took mine and drank it in 4 swallows. As Yalta seated herself, I gave Diodora the bench and settled on the floor where I could look into the garden to watch for Lavi. The news you brought me was a great shock, she said. I have thought of nothing else. Neither have I, said Yalta. I'm sorry I thrust so much on you at once. I'm not known for subtlety. My delicate side wore away many years ago. Diodora smiled. It was the first time we'd seen her do so, and it was like a little dawn had broken over the room. I was glad at first that you stayed away from Isis Medica as I asked, but then, when she said nothing further, Yalta responded, I wanted to go back, if only to see you from afar, but I felt I should honor your wishes. I'm happy you've come. I remembered what you said about your brother confining you here. Even if you decided to ignore my wishes, I didn't know if it would be possible for you to leave. So I've come to you. Weren't you concerned you might encounter Haran? I asked. Yes, but I conceived a story in case I came upon him. I was relieved not to tell it, not to need it. Please, tell us. She undraped a pouch from her shoulder and extracted a bronze bracelet carved with the head of a vulture. I planned to show him my bracelet and say, one of your servants may have left this behind in the healing sanctuary at Isis Medica. I've been sent to return it. Would you kindly let me speak with one of them? Her story was shrewd, but it bore flaws Haran was too clever to miss. He would know Diodora was an attendant at Isis Medica, and look at her. She was the image of me. And when you spoke with the servant, what did you plan to say? I asked. She reached into the pouch once more and removed a small ostracon. I planned to beg her, servant to servant, to deliver it to Yalta. There's a message on it to my mother. She lowered her eyes. The word mother hung in the air, golden and unmissable. You read and write? I asked. My master taught me. She handed the ostracon to Yalta, who read its 6 words aloud. I beg you to come again. D. Out in the garden, I could see the last orange clamor of the sun. Haran would return home soon, yet we lit all the lamps and talked, even laughed. Yalta asked her daughter about her work in the healing sanctuary, and Diodora told of bleeding, sacred baths, and the intoxicating plants that induce dreams. I'm one of only 2 attendants who write down the petitioner's dreams when they wake. My master taught me to read and write so I could have this high position. She amused us for a short while with accounts of the more preposterous dreams she'd recorded. I take my dream recordings to the priest who deciphers their meanings and prescribes cures. I know not how he does it. And do these cures work? I asked in bafflement. Oh yes, almost always. I glimpsed a movement in the garden and saw Lavi treading through the spiky palm shadows. Catching my eye, he lifted his forefinger to his lips and concealed himself behind the foliage near the open door. Do you live within the temple precinct? Yalta was asking. Since my master died when I was 16, I've had a bed in the temple domicile with the other attendants. I'm free now and make a small wage. We went on asking questions while she basked in the genuineness of our attention. But after a while, she begged Yalta for knowledge about the 2 years they'd spent together before being separated. My aunt told her stories about fear of crocodiles, her favorite lullaby, how once she dumped a bowl of wheat flour on her head. You had a little wooden paddle doll, Yalta told her, a brightly painted one I found in the market. You called her Mara. Diodora sat up very tall, her eyes widening. Was her hair made of flax threads with an onyx bead on each end? Yes, that was Mara. I still have her. She's all I have from my life before I was bought by my master. He said I arrived clutching her. I didn't remember her name. She shook her head. Mara, she repeated. In this way, she took the bits and pieces Yalta offered and began to piece them into a story of who she was. I'd stayed very quiet, listening. They seemed to inhabit a realm of their own. But after a while, Diodora noticed my reserve and said, Anna, tell me of yourself. I hesitated a moment before telling her about her family in Sepphoris, father, mother, and Judas. But I said what I could, leaving out a great deal. I described Jesus, and my heart pined so badly that I resorted to tales of Delilah standing in the water trough just to have the relief of smiling. Darkness came, and in that softening, Diodora turned to Yalta. When you told me who you were, I didn't know if I should believe it. That you could be my mother, it seemed impossible. But I saw myself in you. Deep inside, I knew who you were. After I heard your confession, bile rose in me. I told myself, she left me once, now I will leave her. So I walked away. Then you called me daughter. You called out your love. She went and knelt beside Yalta's chair. I cannot forget that you left me. That knowledge will always remain in a corner of me, but I wish to let myself be loved. There was no time to ponder or rejoice in what she'd said. The door flew open. Haran stepped into the room. Behind him, the obsequious servant. Number 18. Yalta, Diodora, and I stood and edged together, shoulders touching, as if to make a tiny fortress. Since you didn't knock, I assume you've come on a matter of urgency, Yalta said to Haran, sounding remarkably restrained, but when I looked at her, she gave the impression of little bolts of lightning flashing around her head. I was told you received a visitor, he said. His eyes were fixed on Diodora. He searched her face, curious, but as yet unseeing, and I realized that was all he knew, a visitor. Who are you? He asked, coming to stand before her. I was desperately searching for some scenario to explain her presence, something about Diodora being Pompil's sister who'd come regarding Lavi's marriage. We shall never know if my fabrication might have convinced him, or if Yalta, who was also readying to speak, might have distracted him. Or, for just then, Diodora pulled the vulture bracelet from her pouch and offered her clumsy story, too frightened to grasp that it made little sense now. I'm an attendant at Isis Medica. One of your servants left this behind in the healing sanctuary at Isis Medica. I've been sent to return it. He glanced at the cups of wine and gestured toward Yalta and me. And are these the servants who left the bracelet? No, she sputtered. I was only inquiring if they knew who it belonged to. Haran was looking at Yalta now, a burning, triumphant look. His gaze returned to Diodora. He took a step closer to her. He said, Chaya, I see you're back from the dead. We stood motionless as if blinded by an inexplicable burst of light. Even Haran did not move. The room was silent. There was only the smell of the oil lamp, a cold tingling in my arms, heat shoving through the courtyard door. I looked out toward the garden and saw Lavi's crouched shadow. It was Yalta who broke the thrall. Did you really think I would not seek out my daughter? I thought you smarter and more prudent than to try, he answered. Now, I shall ask you. Did you think I wouldn't fulfill my promise to go to the Romans and have you arrested? Yalta gave him no answer. She glared at him, defiant. I, too, had a question, but I didn't voice it. Would you like it known, Uncle, that you declared your niece dead and then sold her into slavery? The disgrace of it would cost him. He would be thrust into scandal, public shame, and banishment, and I saw that this was his deepest fear. I decided I would remind him of what was at stake, but delicately. I said, won't you have mercy on a mother who only wants to know her daughter? We don't care how Chaya came to belong to the priest at Isis Medica. That was long ago. We'll say nothing of it to anyone. We care only that she is reunited with her mother. I'm not so great a fool as to trust 3 women who hold their tongues, and certainly not the 3 of you. I tried again. We don't wish to reveal your sins. Indeed, we'll return to Galilee and you will be rid of us." "Would you leave me behind again?" Theodora cried, turning to her mother. "No," said Yalta, "you would come with us." "But I don't wish to go to Galilee." "Oh, Theodora, you are not helping." Haran smiled. "I'll grant that you're clever, Anna, but you won't persuade me." He was, I realized, driven as much by revenge as by his fear of disgrace. "Besides, I'm afraid you'll be unable to go anywhere. It has been reliably reported to me that you've committed a theft." "Theft?" I tried to make sense of what he'd said. Observing my confusion, he added, "It's a crime to steal papyrus." I lifted my eyes to the servant in the doorway. I could hear Yalta breathing a quick, raspy sound. Theodora cowered against her. "Charge me if you must," Yalta said, "but not Anna." He ignored her and went on speaking to me. "The punishment for stealing in Alexandria can be as harsh as for murder. The Romans show little mercy, but I will do my best to have you spared the flogging and mutilation. I will plead for both of you to be exiled to western Nubia. There's no return from there." I could hear nothing but the heartbeat in my head. It grew until the entire room pounded. My grip on the world loosened. I had not been clever. I'd been reckless and full of hubris, thinking I could outwit my uncle, steal and deceive without consequence. I preferred to be flogged and mutilated 7 times over rather than sent to this place of no return. I must be free to go back to Jesus. I looked at my aunt, whose silence puzzled me. Why didn't she rail at him? But my voice, too, had disappeared into the dark in my throat. Fear sloshed in my belly. It seemed impossible that I'd fled Galilee to avoid arrest, only to be charged in Egypt. Haran was speaking to Theodora. "I will allow you to return to Isis Medica, but it's on the condition that you never speak of this night, nor of your origins, nor of me and this house. And you will not attempt to seek out Yalta and Anna. Give me your oath and you may go." He waited. Theodora's eyes trailed to Yalta, who nodded at her. "I give my oath," she said. "If you break it, I'll learn of it and bring charges against you as well," he said. He believed her to be a fragile girl, one he could browbeat into obedience. Right then, I didn't know if he'd appraised her rightly or wrongly. "Leave now," he said. "My servant will see you out." "Go," Yalta told her. "I'll come to you when I can." She hugged her mother, then stepped through the doorway without looking back. Haran strode across the room and yanked the door to the courtyard closed. He slid the horizontal bolt into the post and locked it with a key tied to a cord around his tunic. When he turned to us, his face had mellowed some, not from lack of resolve, it seemed, but from weariness. He said, "You'll be confined here tonight. In the morning, I'll hand you over to the Romans. It's regrettable it came to this." He left, closing the main door behind him. The outside bolt slid into place with a soft thud. The key turned. I ran to the courtyard door and knocked gently at first, then louder. "Lobby's in the garden," I told Yalta. "He's been hiding there." I called out through the thick, impenetrable door. "Lobby! Lobby?" No sound returned. I went on beckoning him for several moments, slapping my palm against the wood, absorbing the sharp stings. Finally, I gave up. Maybe Haran had ensnared him too. Crossing the room, I shook the handle on the main door as if I could wrest it free of its hinges. I paced. My mind was whirling. The windows in our sleeping rooms were too high and too narrow to climb through, and calling for help seemed useless. "We have to find a way out," I said. "I will not go to Nubia." "Conserve your strength," Yalta said. "You will need it." I slid onto the door beside her with my back against her knees. I looked from one locked door to the other, a sense of futility gathering in me. "Will the Romans really punish us merely on the word of Haran?" I asked. Her hand came to rest on my shoulder. "It seems Haran means to swear his case to the Roman court instead of the Jewish one. So I'm unsure, but I suppose he'll set forth witnesses," she said. "Rubel's old friends from the militia will be eager to say I poisoned him. Tell me, who saw you take the papyri?" "Haran's obnoxious servant." "Him." She made a grunt of disgust. "He will take pleasure in bearing witness against you. But we will deny their accusations. If we're allowed to speak, yes, we won't give up hope, Anna, but neither should we allow our hope to be false. Haran has Roman citizenship as well as the ear of the Roman prefect of Alexandria. He commands an important business and is one of the highest-ranking members of the Jewish council. I, on the other hand, am a fugitive, and you are a foreigner. My eyes began to burn. There's also the possibility my brother could bribe the court authorities. I lowered my head to my knees. Fugitive, foreigner, tap, tap. We looked in unison at the courtyard door. Then came the clatter of a key. The key pegs found the pins in the lock, and Pompil stepped inside, followed by Lavi, who held up an iron key tied with a piece of identifying parchment. I threw my arms around each of them. "How did you come up on the key?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Haran has 2 for each door," Pompil said. "The extra ones are kept in a pouch that hangs on a wall in his study. Lavi was able to read the labels." She beamed at him. "You heard Haran's threats?" I asked him. "Yes, every word." I turned to Yalta. "Where will we go?" "I know of only one place where Haran wouldn't trespass," she said. "We'll go to the Therapeutic. Their precinct is sacred among the Jews. We'll be safe there. They'll take us in? I spent 8 years there. They'll give us a haven." Since the moment Haran had locked us in, the world had pitched side to side like a ship. But I felt it settle now into an immense rightness. "The community sits on the shore of Lake Mariotis," Yalta said. "It will take us nearly 4 hours to walk the distance, perhaps longer in the darkness. We'll have to carry a lamp." "I'll see you there safely," Lavi said. Yalta gazed at him, a frown, a twist to her mouth. "Lavi, you can't continue to stay in Haran's house either." Pompil looked at the ground like the ground had opened beneath her. "He cannot leave here." "He'll be in danger if he stays," Yalta said. "Haran will naturally assume Lavi helped us escape." "Then I will leave too," she said. "He's my husband now." I touched her arm. "Please, Pompil, we need you to remain here at least a while longer. I'm still awaiting the letter that will tell me it's safe to return to Galilee. I can't bear to think it would come and I wouldn't know of it. I need you to watch for it, and when it arrives, to see that it gets to us. It's selfish of me to ask this of you, but I beg you, please." Lavi said, "We have told no one of our marriage for fear Haran would dismiss Pompil from his employ. He looked at his wife of only a week. He wouldn't suspect you of being involved in their leaving." "But I don't wish to be separated from you," she said. Lavi spoke gently to Pompil. "You know as I do that I can't remain here. The library has a domicile for the librarians who aren't married. I will stay there, and I wish you to remain here until Anna's letter comes from Galilee. Then I will find us lodging together." I'd been away from Jesus for 1 year and 6 months, an eternity. He was traveling about Galilee without me, preaching that God's kingdom was near, while I, his wife, was far away. I sympathized with Pompil, but her severance from her husband would be an eye blink in comparison to mine. "It seems I'm given no choice," she said. Her words brimmed with resentment. Lavi slit open the door to the garden and peered out. He handed the key to Pompil. "Return the key before it's discovered missing, then unbolt the door in the servants' quarters that leads outside. If anyone questions you about your whereabouts, tell them you have no knowledge of it. Behave as if I've betrayed you. Let your anger be known." He kissed her cheeks and nudged her out the door. I worked swiftly to squeeze my possessions into my 2 travel pouches. My scrolls filled one entirely, leaving me to stuff the other with clothing, the mummy portrait of my face, the little bag that contained my red thread, and what was left of our money. Once again, I would leave carrying the incantation bowl in my arms. "19. When Skepsis, the old woman who led the Therapeutic, looked at me, I felt swallowed by her stare. She reminded me of an owl, perched there on the edge of a bench with her piercing gold-brown eyes and white feathery hair ruffled from sleep. Her squat body was hunched and still, but her head swiveled from me to Yalta as she listened to my aunt explain how we came to be standing in the vestibule of her small stone house in the middle of the night, begging for sanctuary. Throughout our long, exhausting trek from Alexandria, Yalta had schooled me in the community's strange workings. "The members are divided into juniors and seniors," she'd explained. "The juniors aren't necessarily the youngest members, as you would think, but rather the newest. I wasn't thought of as a senior until I'd been with them for 7 years." "Are the juniors and seniors seen as equals?" I'd asked. "If there were a hierarchy, I would most certainly be at the bottom of it. Everyone is seen as equal, but the labor is divided differently between them. The community has its patrons, including Haran, so I suppose they could hire servants, but they don't believe in them. It's the juniors who grow and prepare and serve the food, tend the animals, build the houses, whatever labor is required. The juniors do it. along with their spiritual work. I used to work in the garden in the mornings and return to my solitude in the afternoon. The seniors have no work at all? Well, they've earned the privilege of devoting all of their time to spiritual work. We trudged past sleeping villages, vineyards, wine presses, villas, and farms, Lavi walking ahead of us holding the lamp, and relying on Yalta to call out directions. I marveled that we didn't get lost. She said, "Every 49th day, there's an all-night vigil filled with feasting, singing, and dancing. The members work themselves into a state of ecstasy. They call it a sober drunkenness." What manner of place was this? Nearing the reedy shores of Lake Mariotis, we grew quiet. I wondered if Yalta was remembering when she'd arrived here before, freshly torn from her daughter. It was no different this time. I watched the moon bob on the water, stars floating everywhere. I could smell the sea just over the limestone ridge. I felt the mix of fear and elation I used to get long ago waiting at the cave for Jesus to appear. At the nadir of the night, we turned off the road onto an exceptionally steep hill. Up on this slope, I could make out clusters of flat-roofed houses. "They're small and simple," Yalta said, following my gaze. "Each one has a little courtyard, a room for sleeping, and what they call a holy room for spiritual work." It was the third time she'd used the odd phrase. "What is this spiritual work?" I asked. After 10 years of daily toils in Nazareth, it was hard to envision sitting around in a holy room. "Study, reading, writing, composing songs, prayer, you'll see." Just before we reached the tiny gatehouse, we stopped, and Lavi handed us the travel pouches he'd carried. I dug inside mine for a handful of drachmae. "Take these," I said. "When the letter from Judas arrives, have Pamphile hire a wagon and make her way to us as quickly as she can." "Don't worry, I will see to it." He lingered a moment, then turned to leave. I caught his arm. "Lavi, thank you. I think of you as my brother." The night obscured his face, but I felt his smile and reached out to embrace him. "Sister," he said, then bid Yalta goodbye and turned to make the long journey back. One of the juniors was keeping watch in the gatehouse. He was a skinny man who balked at first to let us in. His job, as he said, was to keep out thieves, charlatans, and wayfarers, but when Yalta told him she'd once been a senior member of the Therapeutae, he leapt to do her bidding. Now standing in Skepsis' house, listening to Yalta elaborate on why I stole the papyri, I wondered if I would have the chance to experience any of the things my aunt had described. She'd already explained that we'd fled Galilee to avoid my arrest. I tried to read Skepsis' expression. I suppose she was considering the persistent way trouble seemed to follow me around. "My niece is an exceptional scribe and scholar, more so than any man I've known," Yalta said, finally offsetting my shortcomings with praise. Skepsis patted the bench beside her. "Come and sit beside me, Yalta." She'd implored her to do so earlier, but Yalta had refused, pacing, as she'd recounted her reunion with Diodora and Haran's threats. Yalta sighed heavily now and sank onto the bench. She looked haggard in the lamplight. Skepsis said, "You've come to us out of desperation, but that alone is not a reason to take you in. Those who dwell here do so out of love for a quiet, contemplative life. They come to study and to keep the memory of God alive. Can you say you're here for those reasons as well?" Yalta said, "When I was sent here before, you took me in rather than let me be punished. I'd left my daughter behind and I was grieving. I spent much of my time imploring you to help me find a way to leave. My happiest day was when you struck a deal with Haran that allowed me to go to Galilee. Though it took you long enough, 8 years, Skepsis chuckled. "I feel now as I did then," Yalta continued. "I won't lie and say I've come here for the noble reasons you mention." "I can say it, though," I declared. They turned to me with startled expressions. If I could have peered into my old copper mirror at that moment, I believe I would have witnessed the same surprise on my own face. "I've come with the same desperation as my aunt, but I've arrived with all the things you said are necessary to dwell here. I've come with a love for the quiet life. I wish nothing more than to write and study and keep the memory of Sophia alive." Skepsis scrutinized the pouch on my shoulder stuffed with scrolls, the ends of which protruded from the opening. I was still clutching my incantation bowl, holding it tightly to my abdomen. I'd not taken time during our escape to find a cloth to wrap it in, and the white surface was grimy from where I'd set it down in the reeds in order to relieve myself. May I see the bowl? Skepsis asked. It was the first time she'd addressed me. I handed it to her, then watched her lift the lamp to the opening and read my inmost thoughts. Skepsis handed back the bowl, but not before cleaning the sides and bottom of it with her hymn. I can see from your prayer that the words you spoke to us a moment ago are true. Her eyes shifted to Yalta. Old friend, because you accounted for your and Anna's sins, holding nothing back, I know you are honest in all else. As always, I know where you stand. I will give you both refuge. I require one thing from Anna in return. She turned to me. I require that you write a hymn to Sophia and sing it at our next vigil. It was as if she'd said, Anna, you shall climb to the top of the cliff, sprout wings, and fly. I know nothing about composing a song, I blurted. Then how fine it is that you'll have this chance to learn. Someone is required to write a new composition for every vigil, and the songs have become sadly alike and unadventurous. The community will be glad to have a fresh hymn. A hymn to Sophia, and she wished me to perform it. I felt both petrified and captivated. Who will teach me? You will teach yourself, she said. There won't be another vigil for 46 days. You'll have ample time. 46 days. Surely I would not still be here. That's a perfect place to stop. Thanks for joining today. So I started at the beginning and asked what your favorite documentaries were. And I said that mine recently were The Social Dilemma and Fantastic Fungi. And I'll post a link to those in the comments, actually up in the text above this video. So I hope that that'll be helpful and give you something new to watch. And I'd love to know your favorite documentary. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you next Thursday at 12:30. I always post in the group the times, just as a reminder to everybody. So if something comes up, sometimes I'm a little bit delayed and I might adjust the time a little bit, but in most cases I'll try to stick to the same schedule. Something comes up, sometimes with my dog, we go out for a walk and sometimes it's hard to bring her back or that kind of thing, or I get a phone call. Anyway, have a great afternoon and a great weekend, and stay safe and healthy and well, and read as many books as you can. Okay, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.